Welcome back, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well and staying safe. Today I have a full edit Capture One tutorial where we're not going to get into Photoshop. We're just going to spend all of our time in Capture One, and this was highly requested by you guys. A lot of you enjoyed my previous Capture One tutorial and wanted to see more Capture One tutorials. So in this video, I wanted to highlight some of the new features from the most recent Capture One update. And throughout this tutorial, I'm going to be covering 5 basic concepts that are going to be very helpful for editing portrait style images. Some of which will be white balance for color variability, the healing brush, dodge and burn, the color editor, and also using Luma Range to get that 3-dimensional pop. I will be providing a raw file in the description, so if you want to follow along with me in Capture One, go ahead and check that out. And if you want more in-depth content, check out my Instagram because I post a lot of behind the scenes photos. Now let's go ahead and get started and cover todo el pedo. Before we start, I do want to show you the before and the after. So what's cool is that in the most recent update, they added this new icon now. So now I can just simply click the before and then the after. And I even have the split view slider, which is really cool. And I wish Photoshop would have something like this, but we put there side by side, you can see that we're going to make the colors pop and we're going to add some nice glow to the overall image. So I'm going to kind of leave it the way it was. And then these are all the layers that we're going to be kind of playing around with in a moment. So let's start working with the first part, which is working with the color variability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. So I'm going to click this plus and I'm going to put new filled adjustment layer so it'll adjust the entire image. And what I want to do is I want to name this white balance. And what I want to do is I want to adjust the color variability of this image. Now, I'm not going to get too in-depth on what color variability is. Suhail Photos on Instagram already does a fantastic job in his stories. He has a whole set of information that he's created on his Instagram. So check him out. Danny Batista also does this on his lives and stills in color. All 3 of them are amazing photographers, and I learned this color variability from those 3 photographers. So check them out and also leave them a comment and tell them that I sent you. So going back over here to the white balance and color variability, I'm going to go to my saturation and I'm going to bring this all the way up. And what I want to do is I want to start separating these colors because it's really difficult to see when the white balance is just kind of set on auto what I need to adjust. So bringing up the saturation, what I want to do is I want to start getting these colors to kind of be a little bit, pop on their own. So if I move this Kelvin, what I want is I want as much color variability on the skin as possible. And these colors to kind of separate from each other. So by bringing up the saturation, it helps us identify that. So this number is going to be different on your image. Now this step is optional. If you don't like to do the color variability like this, you don't have to. So I feel like the Kelvin at 4334 looks good, but now my saturation's all the way at 100. I'm not going to leave it all the way at 100. I'm going to put it back at 0, and you'll see that this is the white balance that we should be at. But I'm going to go ahead and bring up my saturation to what I feel looks relatively good. So I'm going to probably leave it around 60, and I'm trying to get to 60. And there we go. So if I hit the check mark here, this is the before, and then this is the after. And you'll notice that the difference there, if you look at the background, everything's kind of like in these warm tones. And by doing this color variability, we've been able to separate these colors so that now when I go into the color editor, I'm going to be able to select them and bring out those colors even more. Now, these numbers, once again, are going to be a little bit different on your image. I am going to be going a little bit more with the saturation only because we're going to stick to just Capture One and we're not going to get into Photoshop. The next thing that I want to address is the exposure. So I'm going to make a new layer and then I'm going to go to new filled adjustment layer. And I'm going to rename this exposure levels plus curves. And then I'm going to go to my level section. And this reminds me, by the way, if you want your interface to be a little bit more easier to work with, Capture One has done some updates, especially in Capture 120, where now you have a new scrollable area. I have my own custom tab set up so that I don't have to be going through back and forth through all these other tabs in Capture One, because this can be very annoying. So if you want to set up your own custom tab, all you need to do is right click here, and then you would go to Add Tab, and then you would go to Custom Tab, and then I selected the heart icon. Don't tell me why, it just picked that. And then here you can add tools. So what I did is I basically customized it so that it felt like Camera Raw and Lightroom, because that's where I came from. And that's what I was used to. So basically that's the way I set it up. And now I have my filters already built into there. I have my library so I can look at all the images that I've captured and all the main things that I use all in this one menu so that I never have to leave into these other tabs. So think about that. So going back to exposure level, I am going to look at my histogram here on my levels, and I'm going to bring in my whites all the way up until maybe about 207. Let's see what it looks like. So 207, hit the before and then the after, and I'm liking that. I think that looks good. And then I'm going to also go into the curves, and I'm going to go into the Luma. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up the highlights just ever so slightly, and then bring in my whites in just a little bit, and then bring down some of the shadows just to add a little bit of contrast. So if I check mark the before and then the after. And the reason why I'm making those adjustments is that I'm looking at my histogram. I'm noticing that I can bring back some of this highlight detail. So that's why I raised this up and I brought my whites in. And the same thing with the levels, just looking at the histogram that I have. Now I could probably bring this in a little bit more, but we're going to be using the Luma Range later in the tutorial, and we'll make those tones pop just a little bit more. The next thing that I'm going to focus on is the blemish removal using the healing adjustment layer. So if I go to my layers panel and I hit this little plus icon, I have here the new heal layer. And what's cool, they just added this in a recent update where now you can have multiple healing adjustments on a layer. So I got to make sure that I have the healing mask icon. So basically the way this works is I can push the left and right bracket to make it larger or smaller. And if I right click, I get the size of the brush. I can change the hardness. I'm gonna leave it at 42 because I wanna keep that sharp texture because I'm working with the skin, so I don't want it to be nice and soft. Opacity 100 and flow 100, and I have pen pressure because I am using a tablet. So it works very similar to Lightroom and Camera Raw. All I gotta do is brush over it. And then now it gives me a little circle that I can drag, and I can sample texture that looks very similar so that I can kind of blend it. So that's all I'm really going to do is I'm just going to make sure that my brush is relatively the same size as the blemish. And I'm just going to make sure that wherever it's sampling from, it's getting similar texture, because I wouldn't want to get it from over here because that's not blending. I'm going to find a very similar area and just make sure that all of these kind of blend with one another. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this part. But before I do, use the space bar to help you navigate so that you can find some of these other blemishes as you're trying to make these adjustments. And now let's take a look at the before and after of just the blemishes. If I come to the layers and I hit this check mark, I could see the before and then the after. Now I want to focus on the hair. So I'm going to add a separate healing layer so that I don't get confused with all the other points that I created already with the blemish one. So I'm going to rename this layer. So I'm going to double click, and up here, just so we stay nice and organized, I'm going to add blemish or blem. And then I'm going to add another one. So I'm going to hit the plus, go to new healing layer, double click, and we're going to name this one hair so that we can focus on that. I'll go ahead and zoom in. And I'm not going to get all the hair out, but I'm just going to get a couple just so you get the general idea. So all I'm going to simply do is make my brush smaller with the left bracket. And we're going to select this piece of the hair here. And we're going to make sure that we get a nice section. That looks good. Grab that one. Very good. And kind of just like the same concept. With the hair, though, you do have to be a little bit more precise. So you do have to slow down a little bit because then it starts to kind of throw off just a little bit when you're selecting the hair. Now that I've made those adjustments on the hair, I'm going to focus now on the eyes and also doing some dodge and burn. So for the eyes, I'm going to zoom into the eyes and I'm going to add a new layer. So this time though, we're going to go a new empty adjustment layer. And the reason for that is that I specifically want to brush the exposure on the eye. So I'm going to push M on the keyboard. That's going to reveal the mask. So when I'm brushing, you'll see that now it turns red. And if I push E, I can go ahead and clean that up if I need to. And what you see in red is where those adjustments are going to be made. So I'm just going to clean this up just a little bit. And now I push M to take that off. And what I can do now, because I've made that selection, I'm going to go ahead and now adjust my exposure to make those eyes pop a little bit. So what I want to do is I want to go to curves. And I'm going to bring in the slider to the left. And I'm going to raise my highlights so that the eyes pop just a little bit more. I'm going to bring the shadows up a little bit as well. Now, right now, you're probably thinking it looks a little bit too much. Don't worry, we're going to make some adjustments right now. So I'm going to go to the blacks. I'm also going to add some contrast, add just a little bit of saturation. And I can even get the white balance and click on the white of the eyes to make sure that they're color corrected in that section there. So if I hit the before and then the after, this is what we get. I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to make sure that I didn't go too far, which in my opinion I did. So this is where I'm just going to bring down my opacity to about maybe 65. And check mark it. This is the before and then the after. And we get that nice, beautiful eye pop. I'm going to take one more look. I'm going to zoom in. And I'm just going to take a look at the eyes to make sure I didn't go too far. I think that looks fine. Bring it down just a little bit more. We'll go 60. And I'm going to rename this layer just because I want to stay organized. I want to name it to eyes. Now we're going to do some dodge and burn in Capture One so that we can fix some of the tonal inconsistencies. So we're going to go here to the layers panel. We're going to hit this little plus icon over here. And we're going to go to new filled adjustment layer only because I want you to see what the exposure is going to do. So when I go to new filled layer, I'm going to name this dodge because we want to lighten. And I'm going to go to my curves just like I would in Photoshop. And I'm going to raise this up. And you'll notice that the image gets lightened, but it does it to the overall image, which we don't want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert this mask. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to put invert mask. So now I'm going to brush that lightness wherever I want. So what I got to do is I got to have the brush tool. I can push B on the keyboard or I can come up here in the middle. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to set my brush up just like I would in Photoshop. So I'm going to make sure my opacity is at 100. And I like to do 1% flow. You can do 2%. The brush size is going to be dependent on the area you're working with. And then I'm going to make sure I have check mark pen pressure, obviously if you're using a tablet. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to kind of even out the tonal inconsistencies, especially right here on the forehead. So I'm just going to brush just ever so slightly here. There's some areas over here as well that I want to adjust. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm just going to do a couple of brush strokes all the way across just to even out some of these tonal inconsistencies. And if I hit this check mark, you'll see the before and then the after. I can also push M on the keyboard and this will show me exactly where I'm brushing. Now, because I am in Capture One, I'm not going to do a detailed kind of dodge and burn like I would in Photoshop. I think this workflow would work best for client work. I know a lot of people, they tell me, or I hear on Instagram or on YouTube, they're just like, yo, I'm not going to spend an hour editing a photo. You know, I have a lot of client photos to do. And I think that this workflow that I'm doing here is going to be perfect for those of you that do client work. You can simply just come in here, fix like the bigger areas and be done with the image. So I'm just going to keep going around the image and just simply adjusting some of these tones once again. And I'm just trying to even them out. Now for the hair, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna increase my flow because I do wanna add some nice glow to the hair. You'll see that there was some natural kind of highlights here. So I definitely wanna come in here and brush and make this a little bit more, make it pop just a little bit more. So that's why I'm increasing my flow so that a little bit more of that effect from that curves that we set up previously over here. So that effect really pops. So now let's take a look at the before and after. If I hit the check mark, this is the before, and then the after. If I push M on the keyboard, this shows me exactly where I was brushing. Didn't go really too heavy with the dodge and burn, or the dodge I should say, because we haven't got to burn yet. But I do want to come back here, and I'm noticing that I do want to adjust this area just a little bit more. So I'm going to come back in, change my flow back to 2, and I'm just going to kind of try to even that all the way across. And I accidentally clicked the I there. So I'm going to just come back and then just even this out ever so slightly, just like that. And we're ready to go on to the next step. Now that we've done our dodge, it's time to do our burn. So I'm going to add another layer. We're going to go to new filled layer, and we're going to do the opposite of dodge. We're going to darken up areas. So I'm going to drag this down, and I'm going to rename this to burn because we're going to selectively darken up areas to add that 3-dimensional pop, and also darken up areas that we don't want to necessarily showcase. So I'm going to invert this so that we don't see this anywhere, because we specifically want to brush where we want that effect to be. So I'm going to make sure I have my brush tool, and we're going to make sure that the flow is at 2, opacity 100, hardness is at 0, and then the pen pressure. And now my goal is to darken up areas that are already naturally dark, like in here in the little flowers. And by darkening up these little areas, what this is going to do is that it's going to make some of the flowers pop that already have this light, and it's also going to make the model pop, which is Brit here. So I'm just going to go in here and just real nice and slow, just darken up these areas because I am at the 2% flow. Now, some of these flowers over here and these leaves over here got some light spill from my light that was coming in from camera right. So I want to darken this up so that my eyes don't necessarily go to this part of the image. So this is where burn would come in handy. Now, of course, I can also go in to the skin and even out some tones. So if I zoom in here, you'll notice that I have this shadow, and then it gets a little bit light, and then it gets a little bit dark. So I might want to even that out. In just a couple of brush strokes, I can maybe possibly even that out and get that little tonal, or those tones I should say, kind of smooth. I can come back to my dodge, and I'm noticing that this area over here, I'm going to zoom in, is a little bit darker than I would like it to be. So I'm just going to do a couple of brush strokes to even that out. I'll switch back to my burn, and this part of the elbow is a little bit bright, so I'm just going to burn it just a little bit. And I'm just going to try to even out, once again, some of these little tones. And I'll go back to burn, and I'll probably burn in just a little bit over here just to make her pop. Burn in just a little bit of this shirt right here. And if I push M on the keyboard, this will show me where I burned. And I click that, and it'll take that off. So let's look at the before and after of just what the burn's done. And there we go. And if I feel like I went too far, which I think I did on the arm, I just push E on the keyboard. And then I can just simply erase some of these little areas where I maybe went a little bit too far. And there we go. So let's look at the before and after so far of what we've done. If I come up here, this is my before. Let's go to full view. And then this is my after. And then if I go to split view, I can now see from a halfway split in the image. This is my right, and this is my before, and then my after. Now we're going to go ahead and focus on some of the color in the image. We're going to target the skin tones, and then we're going to do a little bit of color grading. So to do that, we're going to go back to the plus, and we're going to go to new filled adjustment because we want this to be on the entire image. And we're going to go to skin tone. And when I go into the color editor, right next to the advanced, I have the skin tone, and I can select the skin tone that I want to choose from. So obviously I'm going to select right around the forehead area. And now this kind of gives me a general selection of what I have. If I want to see specifically what I've just targeted, I can hit this little check mark, and this will show me, and it'll kind of take out all the other colors and show me what I just have selected, which I have this area here. I do have the lips, so I am gonna lift this up so that I don't get the lips. So that's what's cool about Capture One is I have these precise controls to really make precise selections here. I can even come in with the lightness that I want and even the darkness. But in this specific example, I think right about here, let me raise this up just a little bit more. I think right about here is a pretty good job of where I want it. So I'm gonna uncheck mark that, the view selected color range. And here what I wanna do is I wanna smooth out just a little bit of the color. If I zoom in, I notice that there's some areas that are a little bit red above her eyebrow and her cheeks. So if I go into the smoothness, I can bring this up to about 27 point, you know what, let's go about maybe 28. So what this is gonna do is that it's gonna get this color that I've selected and it's gonna kind of smooth out everything that I have from this selection and kind of make it look kind of cohesive. Now what I also want to do is I can also adjust the hue. So I can make it more yellow if I wanted to. I can make it more magenta. In this specific example, I felt like 0.4 looked fine, just going a little bit more in the yellows. I did want to bring up the saturation a little bit. Obviously I can bring it all the way up, but I thought that the saturation was going to look good about like at 0.7 was fine for me. The lightness, I can go to 0.1, so I can make the skin darker if I wanted to. I can make it brighter. And in this specific example, I went to 0.01. If I can get there, there we go. And then uniformity, it's very similar to kind of the smoothness here. What this is gonna try to do is that it's gonna try to uniform that specific color all together into one specific hue. So if I drag this to the right, you'll notice that it makes it a little bit more muted. And if I drag it to the left, it's gonna make it kind of that magenta color. So in this one, I did go about to 8. And then the saturation, I did go to about 3. And then the lightness, I went to 7. Now I just remembered I did make a mistake here because here I did have this kind of red tone. And then here it's more this peachy color. So the uniformity, I do want to bring that hue up just a little bit more. And you'll notice that the change in the skin transition here from this peachiness to this area here, if I bring this up and you notice that even the cheek here, if I leave this at 0, it has that magenta-ish color, then it goes to peach. So this is a really powerful tool if I want to even things out. I think on this example, I'll go about 40. I'll zoom out and once again, I can just hit this check mark before and after. You're not going to see much of a difference. I'm going to zoom in. I think you'll see it better if I zoom in. And if I hit the check mark before and then the after, just a small difference here. So I'm gonna just click this and then I'm gonna name this skin tone. So think about how you can use this to kind of add kind of consistent color tones or skin tones to all of your images in your series or your set. Now we're gonna get into the fun part. We're gonna make some of these colors pop. So I'm gonna add another layer. We're gonna go to new fill adjustment layer. And we're gonna go into the advanced color editor. And what I want to do is I'm going to zoom out here, pressing Control minus. And the first thing I want to select is I want to pick the purples from these flowers. And here it tells me that I've selected them and I can hit this little view selected color range and it'll show me exactly what I have selected. And perfect, I have those flowers. That's exactly what I wanted. And what I want to do is I want to smooth out the colors because it's a little bit different on each section throughout the image. So I'm going to go to about 24.4 will be fine. Then I do want to adjust the hue. So if I go to the left, I can make it blue. If I go to the right, I can make it red. Depending on your image, you can go wherever you want with it. But in my case, I just wanted to go about 0.7 was fine for me. The saturation, I did want to bring that up. So I did bring the saturation up to about 38.2. Let me go ahead and zoom out here so you guys can see this. And so here is the before and then the after, adding that nice saturation. Now I am going to go back to the hue. I am going to change it a little bit more. We're going to go about 8.5. Okay, that's close enough. So if I hit the check mark before and then the after, really making those flowers pop a little bit. And then we're also going to go into the lightness. I do want to make them just a little bit brighter. So I'm going to go to 2.2. What's cool about this color editor is that I can add multiple layers of color. So I've already selected the purples. Now I want to select the greens because that's another image, or another color, I should say, that is also dominant in this image. So I'm going to click this little picker. I'm going to click the greens, or these kind of like, I guess you could say it's almost like turquoise almost, or teal. And so smoothness we're going to leave at 20. We're going to go to 5.5 on the hue. We're just going to change the color just a little bit. And then we're going to bring the lightness down to about 2.2 if I can get there. There you go. And so that pretty much does it for our colors. We've made those colors pop just a little bit, the purples, and we've adjusted the greens. And I'm going to rename this to Color Editor so that we just stay a little bit more organized. One of my favorite things to do to really make the colors pop is to add a curves layer and add some nice contrast using the reds, the greens, and the blue channels. So I'm going to add that by going to the plus, new filled adjustment layer. And I like to have these separated by layers because I could always go back to the opacity and make adjustments separately. So I'm going to find my curves and we're going to go into the reds. And I don't know if I'll get the exact numbers that I used here, but I used about 192 to 202 here. There we go, we got that. And then I like to bring this one down to about 66, 65, see if I can get close enough. There you go. And then I'm going to come into my greens and I'm going to add the same type of S curve again. And here you can already see it actually looks kind of cool actually. So we've added these kind of like magentas. I am going to be making pretty soon a curves tutorial on how to work with curves. So I apologize if you don't understand how curves works, but that is in the plans at some point to make. And there we go. So now here with the curves, once again, I mainly added that to add some nice color pop to the image. It's just something that I like to add into my image, just S curve to the red, green, and blue channels. Now, if you feel like it's a little bit too much or it brought out certain colors, you can erase it. So I'm going to erase it from the eyes. The eyes are popping just a little bit too much now because they did have a little bit of purples in there. So I'm going to adjust that. I'm going to make sure that I do still have the color in the skin. I just didn't want it to target the eyes. So I'm going to brush some of that color back in to the skin. I accidentally removed it. There we go. And if I zoom out, let me erase. I think some of this purple came from the color editor too. There we go. Okay. So now when I zoom out, if I felt like that was too much, this is why I like to make it in separate layers. I can go into my opacity and bring this down. So I am going to bring it down. I'm going to go maybe about 75 so that I don't go too far. Now we're almost done with this tutorial. I have 2 more steps. We're going to get into Luma Range and color balance. One of the questions I get a lot is how do I get that 3-dimensional pop in my images? Well, it's going to be Luma Range, so stay tuned. So for the Luma Range, the way this works is I am going to add a new filled adjustment layer. We're going to add a curves. And what I want to do is I want to add some 3-dimensional pop to the image by darkening up specifically the shadows or the darks that I want. But if I bring this down, you'll notice that it does it to the overall image. I want it to be more specific when I'm doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and just still bring it down for now. I don't want it to affect the highlights in the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Luma Range. And this is kind of like a luminosity mask, also is very similar to Blend If in Photoshop. So what I want to do is I want to blend this off from the highlights. So here we have the blacks, the shadows, the highlights, and then the whites. So when I drag this in, and you'll notice what happens to the image, it starts being removed. That darkness is removed from the midtones now and is being removed from the highlights. So I'm going to drag this in up until about 36, 38 will be fine. And then I do want to feather this off. So I want to feather this off to about 86. And then I do have a sensitivity slider so that I can kind of feather it just a little bit more. And if I check mark this, I can display the mask and it'll show me specifically where this is adding that darkness though, which is those red areas that you see there. So if I drag this in just a little bit more, it'll make that adjustment. And if I hit apply, it'll add that little pop and darkness to the image. Now, right now it's a little bit too dark, so I can always come back to this curve and then make those adjustments and get it to where I want it to be at the darkness level that I want. Now I don't want it in the hair. If I push M on the keyboard, it shows me that it is affecting the hair. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna push E on the keyboard, get the eraser tool, and I'm gonna go ahead and erase it from the face and from the hair that is around, because I don't wanna lose some of that detail in the hair. So that's one of the reasons why I'm removing it from the hair, and I'm pushing M. So if I go back again, if I hit the before and then the after, I'm gonna raise it back up just a little bit. I don't wanna add it too dark. Keep in mind, I can also go to opacity and bring it down here as well. So that is the Luma. I'm gonna name it Luma and then dark. So just adding a little bit of darkness to the background. And then I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna do the opposite. So I'm gonna go to new filled layer. I'm gonna rename this to Luma Light. And I'm gonna get my curves and I'm gonna bring this up. Actually, I'm gonna come up over here to my highlights and I'm gonna bring this up right about here. And we're gonna go to Luma Range, because what I wanna do is I wanna add this pop to the skin. But once again, I don't want it to go into the midtones and the shadows. I want it to be more specific. So I'm gonna go into Luma Range here, and I'm gonna go into the shadows and the blacks because I don't want it to show up there. So I'm gonna bring this in, and I'm gonna bring this about to 182. And once again, look at how it's being removed from the shadows and the midtones. Let me put the display mask to make it even more apparent. And I'm gonna go about to 182. And then I'm gonna feather it off just a little bit. We're gonna go to about 119. And by going about to 119, you'll notice that it's adding this pop, and it's being specifically targeted to the forehead and the skin, areas that already had that nice light on it. So I'm gonna take this off. I am gonna adjust the sensitivity a little bit. I'll bring the fall off back in just a little bit. And if I hit apply, you'll notice that the skin is adding that little three-dimensional pop. It's almost like a global dodge to the image. Now, if I feel like I went too much, I can come back to my curves and I can bring this back down if I need to. Or I can also come to opacity and make those adjustments, because we don't want it to make it too much where it starts to look a little bit off. So if I hit the before, after, still feel like it's a little bit too much, I'll bring it down to about 60. Obviously, your numbers will be different depending on your image, but I think about 60 looks pretty damn good. And because we're only editing this image in Capture One, I'm gonna go a little bit more heavy on the color grading because we're not gonna get into Photoshop. So now I'm gonna go into my color balance. So I'm gonna hit the plus, new filled adjustment layer. I'm gonna rename this to color balance, and this will be the final step, but this one's very important. So make sure you stay tuned in here, because when we get into the color balance, what I want to do is I specifically want to go into my shadows. And I love this color wheel because I can click and then drag in to what color I want to add into my shadows. Now, what's nice about this image is we know that we got a lot of purples. We have a lot of greens or teals and then the yellows. So for me, now you might disagree with this, but I actually want to go in the purples. I really want to emphasize those purples that we already have in the image. So I'm going to go for something a little bit different. I'm going to add just a little bit of purple to my image. Now, the more I drag it in, the more deeper that purple is going to be. I don't want to get that crazy, but I just want to bring it in just a little bit. And then as far as the midtones, I'm going to go more in the oranges, so we bring back some of that warmth. So I'm going to go right in between red and yellow. And then under the highlights, I'm actually going to go opposite, because we have a lot of orange here. I'm going to go opposite of orange, the complementary color, and I'm going to add just a little bit of teals to kind of cool that off so that it's not so orange heavy. So I'm going to go and just add just a little bit of teals, just like that. Now I am going to go to the master, and under the master, I am going to just add a little bit of orange to the entire image. So this will add like a kind of nice overall orange tone to the image. So I'm just going to find right about where I want it, which is right about there. And that looks good. If I hit the check mark before and then the after, it's looking good. I might actually come back to my shadows and add just a little bit more purples, okay? Now the last couple of things I'm gonna add, I am gonna add some clarity, just to add a little bit of sharpness to the image. So I'm gonna add about 3. I am gonna add some sharpness, so about 100 should be pretty good. I'll get close to that number. Let's go 95, will be fine. Vignette will be important, so we're gonna go about maybe -38 is fine. We're gonna add some grain. I think these settings came from the other image when I made a duplicate, so I switched it to 5.
And then on the basic characteristics, I changed it to film extra shadow. So let's take a look at the overall image, the before. Let's go to the full screen. Let's go before and then the after. Oh my gosh, can't even do this. Before and then the after. Let's zoom in so that you guys could see some of the details. This is the before and then the after.
And that concludes the Capture One tutorial. If you want to see my in-depth process into how I work in Photoshop, I have full edit videos, dodge and burn, frequency separation, and color grading videos on my YouTube channel. Thank you guys for watching, and I would truly appreciate it if you can give this video a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.